Greetings, Iain from RTO here. Welcome to a brand new show, part of the Picks and Mix series, the 4-weekly cycle. Now we've come to the last of the 4 weeks, and this is called Mixing It Up. It's a show that we're going to look at producers, and the format will be we'll have a talk about the producer, go through the albums I actually produced, not engineered, because a lot of producers engineered before they became producers, so it's just the albums that they are on the album as a producer we'll be looking at. And then I will pick my top 5 albums from that list. So the first person up in this show is the one and only Mr. Martin Birch. Absolute belter of a producer, has produced some of the finest rock albums and live albums that exist on the planet. He was born on the 27th of December 1948 and sadly left us on the 9th of August 2020. Before becoming a producer, he was a sound engineer, and he worked on many of the early Deep Purple albums, Wishbone Ash to name 2, but he became renowned for engineering and producing bands like Purple, again, Rainbow, Fleetwood Mac, Whitesnake, Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Iron Maiden to name but a few. So he started his work in 1968 and hung up his headphones in 1992. So, going through all the things, the first one that I found that he was pure producer on it was 1972, and he produced an album for Silverhead called Silverhead. An album I don't know much about, listen to it, it's okay. And 73, he had a busy year. He produced 2 Fleetwood Mac albums, the first one being Penguin, and he was not just the producer, he was sound engineer and mixed it. Also in 73 he did Mystery to Me, producer, engineer, and he played guitar on this one for Fleetwood Mac. Also he produced an album for Gary Moore called Grinding Stone, where he produced and was sound engineer on that one as well. 1974, he went back to work with Deep Purple. He had been a sound engineer on Machine Head and Fireball and all them, but in 1974 he was asked to co-produce Stormbringer, where he was the engineer as well and did the mixing. You can understand why he was co-producer, because Ritchie Blackmore wouldn't have let him have total control. 75, he went back to work with Deep Purple, and Ritchie had left by then, so they must have been impressed with his work, because he co-produced and engineered the Come Taste the Band album. Also in 75, Ritchie Blackmore called upon him to produce Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow as well. So he worked with both camps. Again, he was co-producer, engineer and mixer. 1976, he worked on the Made in Europe live album, where he produced and engineered and mixed it. He'd all previously worked on Made in Japan as the sound engineer. 76, sorry, get the right year. John Lord called up on him and says, "Could you produce my album Sarabande?" And Martin says, "Yes, I'll engineer it," and remixed it. Also in 1976 he produced this gem, Rising. More about that later. So in 1977 he was at it again, doing some live stuff. He co-produced and engineered the last concert in Japan for Deep Purple. Also in 77 he produced this live album for Rainbow on stage. Did the same, produced it, engineered it and did the mixing. '78, another busy year. He made an album. He produced an album for a band called Wayne Country and the Electric Chairs, "Storm the Gates of Heaven." Yeah, not the best thing he ever did. Also in '78, he continued his work with Rainbow. This time he was producer, engineer and mixing on Long Live Rock and Roll. And now this is the strange one. He produced this album by Roger Glover called Elements. Now Roger Glover is a fine producer in his own right, and we will be looking at his work as a producer at some stage. But he got Martin Birch in on this one. Also in '78, David Coverdale called up his services and he produced this little album called Snakebite, which is a combination of 2 solo albums from David Coverdale. He also in '78 was producer on the debut album for Whitesnake, Trouble. 1979 he did some work with another Whitesnake person, Bernie Marsden. He produced this About Time too. It's a really good album. It's a little gem, very hard to find. I've not got it, but I have been able to put the songs together. It's really, really good. '79 again, very busy. Cozy Powell called up for him to work on his first debut album, Over the Top. Obviously he'd worked with Cozy with Rainbow, so in came Mr. Powell asking. Then 1979 as well, he produced the second Whitesnake album, Love Hunter. Pretty good album. 1980, started the new decade. He was still in demand, a busy year for him. Produced Ready and Willing for Whitesnake. Then he was producer and engineer on Live in the Heart of the City. Also in 1980, he worked for Black Sabbath on Heaven and Hell. He was getting a really good name because also in 1980 he went and worked with the mighty Blue Oyster Cult on Cultosaurus Erectus. Going into 1981, another busy year. Blue Oyster Cult must have been really impressed with him because he was asked back to produce Fire of Unknown. Then he produced his first album for the Iron Maiden, The Brilliant Killers. And he popped up again for Whitesnake to produce Come and Get It. Also in 1981, he was asked back to come and do the second Dio album with Black Sabbath, Mod Rules. 1982 now. Michael Schenker asked him to come and produce and engineer Assault Attack. Great album. He must have done a good job on Killers because he was back for 1982's Number the Beast for Iron Maiden, producer and engineer. And to round out 1982, he came back and did Saints and Sinners for Whitesnake, another great album. Had a quiet year in 1983, but he did produce one of the great Iron Maiden albums, Peace of Mind. 1984, he produced the Slide It In UK. He had a hand in the US remix, but as you know, to me, Slide It In, the UK version, is the best version. 1984, he also did this belter from Iron Maiden, Power Slave. Unbelievable stuff. He'd got this renowned for doing great live albums, so there's only one person that could produce Live After Death for Iron Maiden. He produced it, he mixed it, he engineered it. 1986 now, and carry on his work with Iron Maiden. He produced Somewhere in Time, engineered, mixed it. 1986, Ritchie Blackmore called him out for one more time to help produce the 1986 final vinyl. 1988 now, and this Colossus album from Iron Maiden, Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. Fantastic. Also, live album made in England. Brilliant stuff. Great live album. I was there when he done that. I was at Birmingham. 1990, another album with Iron Maiden, No Prayer for the Dying. And his final album that he produced in his career was this one, Fear of the Dark. As you can see, in 1992 that was, you can see he's worked on some of the greatest albums that have ever existed. I mean, apart from about two, I own every album on that list. There you go. So, my top 5. Tough one, but I went like this. So number 5, I went with Cozy Powell's Over the Top. Had some great people playing on here. There's Cozy Powell, Gary Moore, Clem Clemson, Bernie Martin, Jack Bruce, Don Airy. Highlights on this, of course, is theme 1, which is George Martin wrote this, but it was a track that Van der Graaf generated. Done, great track. Killer's always a great track on here. The Loner, which was a song he dedicated to Jeff Beck. Gary Moore went on to put this on one of his albums. And Over the Top, I love this because it's got the finale of the 1812 in it. Killer album, or one of my favourite albums. Number 4 for me was this one, Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. Amazing album, you know. Killer tracks on here all the way through from the boys. Bruce, Dave, Adrian, Steve and Nico. Moonchild's brilliant. Can I Play with Madness? Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. Highlights of this album. This was just a masterpiece for Martin. One of the best albums that probably the best album that he produced for Iron Maiden. Although Peace of Mind was exceptional, I think this one really nailed it for me. Number 3 for me was this one, Slide It In. We had David Coverdale, Mel Galley, Mickey Moody, Colin Hodgkinson and Cozy Powell and John Lord. Outstanding tracks on here. Gambler, Slide It In, Gimme More Time, Slow and Easy, Guilty of Love. My favourite Whitesnake album, the UK version, of course. I'm not a great lover of that American remix. Great album. Play this to death. Number 2 for me was this Black Sabbath album. This reinvented Black Sabbath. We've always said this. So this is the Ronnie James Dio, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler and Bill Ward with Jeff Nichols. Outstanding tracks on here, of course, of Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Heaven and Hell, and Die Young. But if you haven't guessed, this was the one that absolutely done it. This is the best album he ever produced. It's the best album Rainbow ever did, and it's one of the best albums ever. It's Rainbow Rising, of course, with that classic lineup of Ronnie James Dio, Ritchie Blackmore, Tony Carey, Jimmy Bain, Cozy Powell. Oh, too many good tracks on here. Tarot Woman, Run with a Wolf, Starstruck, Do You Close Your Eyes, probably the weakest track on the album. And side 2 is the perfect side. It's got 2 tracks on it, but they are just belters, aren't they? Stargazer and A Light in the Black. Oh, a masterful album for Martin this was. It worked so many times for Ritchie when he was in Deep Purple. I think this is Martin's finest hour. On one of the greatest rock and roll albums, rock albums of all time. There you go. Just a brilliant, brilliant album. Okay, that's all for the shows today. I'll be back, of course, for the live stream tonight. Next week we go back to a wander down memory lane where we look at the UK top 10, and it will be for the 29th of December 1984. So some great tunes to come on that one. So that's all for this. Hope you've enjoyed this one. So I'll be back later with the live stream. Bye for now, folks.